It was a cold winter afternoon, and the downtown streets were bustling with people rushing to and fro. The air was crisp, the chill cutting through layers of clothing, yet most seemed oblivious to the man sitting on the sidewalk. Wrapped in a faded army jacket, patches barely visible from years of wear, he held a small, crumpled sign. It read, "Veteran hungry, anything helps, God bless." His hands were worn and trembling, not from the cold but from a life of struggle, a life that no longer seemed to have room for hope. His eyes, though tired, held a certain quiet dignity, as if he was used to this, used to the world walking past without a second glance. Then, out of the crowd, a man in his early 30s stopped right in front of him. Dressed in a sharp suit, his shoes shiny, and his confidence brimming, he sneered at the homeless man without a hint of empathy. The man's eyes flickered briefly over the veteran's worn clothes, and with a cruel laugh, he said, "Look at you, what a waste. Bet you were never even a real soldier." His voice was loud, enough for people to hear, but they kept walking, pretending not to notice. Some looked the other way, others quickened their pace, all avoiding the uncomfortable reality the homeless man represented. From a bench nearby, a woman watched in disbelief. Her heart sank as she saw the veteran flinch slightly, the words stinging more than the cold ever could. She couldn't understand how anyone could be so cruel, so dismissive of a man who had given so much, yet here he was, sitting alone in the frigid air, reduced to a target for mockery. She wanted to say something, do something, but the moment passed, and the man in the suit walked away, leaving nothing but the silence of an indifferent crowd. The woman's gaze lingered on the veteran as the scene played out before her. She couldn't help but think about what had led him to this point. His life hadn't always been this way. He had once been proud, strong, a man with a purpose. Years ago, he had enlisted full of youthful ambition, eager to serve his country. He was trained for battle, sent to distant lands, and fought alongside brothers he would never forget. The smell of gunpowder, the roar of gunfire, and the weight of the weapon he carried were all too familiar. He served multiple tours overseas, each one leaving him with new scars, both visible and hidden. He had fought for freedom, for peace, for something greater than himself, but what he came back to was nothing like the home he had imagined. The years of war had taken their toll. The constant stress, the loss of close friends, friends who had become like family, left him shattered in ways he could never explain. When he returned, he found it difficult to adjust. The world had moved on, but he felt like he was standing still, haunted by memories that wouldn't fade, by sounds and images that played in his mind like a broken record. Post-traumatic stress disorder became his constant companion. His once sharp focus became clouded, his ability to sleep interrupted by nightmares that made him relive the horrors of the battlefield. The people around him didn't understand. His wife, once his anchor, became distant, unable to cope with the man he had become. The love they once shared dissolved as he withdrew into himself, consumed by his inner demons. He tried to keep it together, he tried to find work, to move forward, but the job he found couldn't hold his attention for long, and when he lost it, everything began to unravel. With no steady income, and no real support system, he spiraled deeper into despair. His marriage ended in divorce, and soon he found himself alone, penniless and without a home. The streets became his new reality, cold, unforgiving, and cruel. What had once been a man full of pride and strength was now a shadow of himself, carrying only his memories and a battered sign, begging for help that never seemed to come. The world that had once praised him for his service now seemed indifferent to his pain. And so he sat, with nothing but his past to keep him company. The rude man walked off, his laughter still echoing in the veteran's ears as he faded into the crowd. For a moment the veteran's head hung lower, his dignity bruised, his spirit just a little more crushed by the world's cruelty. The woman on the bench watched, her heart aching for him. She wished someone would do something, anything, to lift him out of that moment. But just as the cold seemed unbearable, something changed. A few minutes later, a teenage boy, no older than 16, appeared in front of the veteran. He was with his mother, who had been guiding him gently through the busy street. The boy held out a small brown paper bag, his eyes were filled with sincerity as he knelt beside the veteran. Without a word, he handed the man a sandwich, a warm drink, and a pair of gloves, freshly bought, the kind that could shield against the harsh winter. The veteran, still stunned by the earlier words, looked up slowly. His eyes were misty, not from the cold, but from the kindness that this stranger offered. The mother, smiling softly, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. "Thank you for your service," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "You are not forgotten." It wasn't much, just a sandwich, a drink, and a pair of gloves, but to the veteran, it felt like the world had shifted just a little. In that simple moment, there was no judgment, no cruelty. There was only compassion, and it was enough to bring a tear to his eye. The woman watching from the bench smiled through her own tears. Sometimes, she thought, it was the smallest acts of kindness that could shine the brightest in the darkest of moments. It was a reminder that even when the world felt cold and indifferent, there were still hearts full of warmth and love. A few days passed, and life on the streets seemed to continue as it always had. The woman who had watched the cruel interaction from the bench couldn't shake the image of the veteran's face, his quiet pain lingering in her thoughts. Then one evening, as she was scrolling through her phone, a video popped up in her feed. It stopped her cold. The video showed the exact scene she had witnessed. A bystander had captured the moment when the well-dressed man mocked the homeless veteran. His cruel words echoed clearly in the video, followed by the laughter that had made the veteran shrink with shame. The camera focused on the veteran's reaction, his defeated posture, his quiet dignity amidst the harshness. The video had already gone viral. Hundreds, then thousands of people shared it, tagging the man's face in the comments. As the video spread, so did the outrage. "How could anyone treat another human being like this?" One comment read, "He's a veteran, show some respect." Others added. Within hours, the comments were flooding in from all over, each more furious than the last. Then the truth came out. People began identifying the rude man. He wasn't just some stranger, he was a local businessman, the owner of a popular restaurant chain in the area. A quick search revealed photos of his upscale restaurants, a man who appeared in advertisements as the local success story. His brand, his reputation, was built on the image of a hard-working, community-minded entrepreneur. Now the community wasn't so kind. Social media exploded in backlash. The restaurant chain received hundreds of one-star reviews, with people vowing never to step foot inside again. Boycotts were organized, and the man's name became synonymous with cruelty. Calls for accountability flooded his social media accounts, demanding he address his behavior. It seemed that the world would no longer ignore the ugly side of arrogance and disrespect. The ripple effect of the viral video was swift and powerful. It didn't take long for the public outrage to catch the attention of a non-profit organization dedicated to helping veterans. The video reached their offices, and they immediately set out to find the homeless man. They knew that, with his story, they could bring about a change, not just for him, but for others in similar situations. Within days, they tracked him down. The veteran, who had spent so many months in solitude, surrounded by the harsh realities of life on the streets, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. His face, tired and weathered, became the face of a movement, a symbol of the forgotten heroes who had served their country but were now abandoned in the very country they fought to protect. The nonprofit reached out to him with an offer of help. Donations began pouring in from people across the country, moved by the injustice they had seen. The veteran was given a safe place to live, an apartment, warm and welcoming, the first home he had had in years. But more than that, he was given counseling, therapy for his PTSD, something he had desperately needed but had never known how to ask for. He was also offered a job with the nonprofit, working with other veterans who were struggling like he had. The work allowed him to use his experiences to help others find their way, to guide them through the same darkness he had once faced. It gave him purpose again, a sense of belonging. One afternoon, a local news station arrived to interview him. The veteran sat on a small, modest couch, his hands folded together, his eyes focused on the reporter who asked him about his journey. He spoke with a humility that resonated deeply with everyone who heard him. His words were simple but full of wisdom and quiet strength. When the reporter asked him how it felt to know that people cared, he broke down. His voice cracked, and tears welled up in his eyes. "I never thought anyone cared," he whispered, his shoulders trembling as the weight of those words hit him. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel something other than the isolation that had gripped him for so long. The world hadn't forgotten him after all. In that moment, he wasn't just a homeless man, he was a hero, a survivor, and a living testament to the power of kindness and community. The businessman, unable to ignore the mounting pressure, finally issued a public apology. It was a carefully crafted statement, read from a teleprompter, but there was no warmth in his words. He claimed to regret his actions and stated that he had been misunderstood in the moment. He briefly acknowledged the veteran's service, but his apology lacked sincerity. It was forced, as if he were simply trying to salvage his brand, rather than show genuine remorse. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. The public saw right through him. His apology felt hollow, a mere attempt to regain control over a narrative that had already spiraled beyond his reach. People weren't interested in his words anymore. They were interested in action, in accountability, and as more details about his behavior emerged, the backlash only grew. His restaurants, once bustling with customers, began to see a sharp decline in sales. Loyal patrons who had once celebrated his success now turned their backs on him. The reviews on his restaurant's social media pages became increasingly scathing, filled with stories of his arrogance and entitlement. It wasn't just the mocking of the homeless veteran that angered people, it was his pattern of behavior. Former employees began speaking out, sharing stories of his abusive attitude, his mistreatment of staff, and his entitled demeanor. Many described working in a toxic environment, where his disdain for others was clear. The whispers of his cruelty grew louder, and investors who had once backed him began to distance themselves. Within weeks, several of his restaurant locations were shut down. He was no longer seen as a successful entrepreneur. Instead, he became a symbol of cruelty, privilege, and the destructive power of arrogance. What had once been an empire built on polished appearances crumbled beneath the weight of his actions, and with it, any trace of respect he had once commanded vanished entirely. Months had passed, and the veteran had found new purpose in his life. He was volunteering at a local food bank for the homeless, a place where he could give back to others who, like him, had once felt forgotten. He had found peace in helping, in knowing that his pain had led to something beautiful. He was no longer alone in the world. One afternoon, as he was preparing meals for those in need, a disheveled man entered quietly, his head lowered and his eyes hidden beneath a hoodie. The veteran didn't think much of it at first. People came and went, each with their own story, but then the man lifted his gaze, and their eyes locked. It was him. The businessman. The same man who had mocked him so harshly months ago, the one who had once stood tall with arrogance and entitlement. Now his clothes were ragged, his face worn, and the confident swagger he once carried was gone. In its place was the quiet humbling of someone who had lost everything: the fortune, the reputation, the power. Now he stood in front of the very man he had once tormented, a shadow of who he had been. The businessman opened his mouth, as if to say something, but no words came. He simply stood there, his face flushed with shame. The veteran didn't mock him, he didn't say a word about the past. Instead he nodded, a simple dignified gesture, and handed the man a plate of food. "Here," he said quietly. "You look like you could use a meal." As the businessman took the plate, their eyes met again. The veteran's face was calm, offering no judgment, only a quiet understanding of what it meant to fall, and what it meant to rise again. The narrator reflected on that moment. Dignity and kindness come from the soul, not status. A person's worth isn't measured by what they have, but by how they treat others, even when no one is watching. The businessman, once full of arrogance, had lost everything. Yet, it was the veteran who had lost so much before, who had the strength to offer him a hand, showing that true strength was not in what you could take from the world, but what you could give back. As the veteran watched the businessman quietly walk away, the weight of everything that had happened settled in. Life had a way of shifting in the blink of an eye, of taking everything you thought you knew and turning it upside down. In one moment, a man could be full of pride, and in the next, he could lose everything. That day one man chose cruelty, and another chose compassion. One had fallen, and the other had risen, not just from his circumstances, but from his heart. The veteran who had been cast aside by so many, had found a way to rise again, not by seeking revenge, but by offering kindness. The businessman, on the other hand, had chosen to mock, to tear down another in order to lift himself. But in the end, it was his own fall from grace that left him silent, humbled by the very man he had once mocked. The narrator's voice softened, carrying a truth learned from the story: never underestimate the heart of someone who has survived a war, especially the one within. Because in the end, it's the strength of the heart, not the riches or the power, that truly determines a person's worth. Thank you for watching this powerful story of resilience, compassion, and the true meaning of strength. It's a reminder that no matter what life throws at us, kindness and dignity can change the course of our lives, and sometimes the lives of others too. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new story filled with emotion and life-changing moments. Like the video if it touched your heart, and share it with your friends so they can experience the power of kindness as well. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to comment below. What part of the story resonated with you the most? Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you again for being part of this journey. Keep spreading love and positivity, and we'll see you in the next story.